The International Criminal Court turns 10 on Sunday. The ICC says it's determined to end impunity across the world, but with only one suspect convicted so far. Has the court fulfilled its basic mission? And can the court work efficiently in a politically polarized world? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Rida Fakhri. July 1st, 2002, the only permanent criminal tribunal set up to try genocide, crimes against humanity and war crimes came into force. A decade later, the International Criminal Court has been ratified by 121 states, with another 32 intending to join. The United States and China, among others, have opted not to. In its first 10 years, the ICC has only made one conviction. Thomas Lubanga, a Congolese warlord, found guilty of recruiting child soldiers. Critics say the ICC has made slow progress, with much, if not all, of its focus on Africa. Apart from the case involving Lubanga, which took 6 years to reach a conviction, the court has issued arrest warrants for 20 individuals, notably Gaddafi's son, Saif al-Islam, Sudan's President Omar al-Bashir, and Joseph Kony. There are currently 4 people in custody. Germain Katanga, the Congolese leader of the Patriotic Resistance Force, charges against him include murder, sexual slavery, and using child soldiers. Mathieu Ngudjolo Chui, a colonel in the Patriotic Resistance Front, he faces 3 counts of crimes against humanity and 6 counts of war crimes. Jean-Pierre Bemba, the former vice president of Congo, charged with 2 counts of crimes against humanity and 3 counts of war crimes. And Laurent Gbagbo, the former Ivorian president, faces 4 charges of crimes against humanity, murder, rape, and other forms of sexual violence and persecution. So far, the Office of the Prosecutor has failed to pursue any investigations outside Africa. This criticism was put to the new ICC chief prosecutor Fatou Bensouda. Speaking to Al Jazeera, she denied any bias against Africa.
We are not in Africa by choice. We did not go to Africa to try cases because that's what we wanted to do. I have said, and I continue to repeat, that Africa is taking leadership in international criminal justice. And this has to be realized. And this has to be adjusted to. And I can cite the cases that we have in Africa and how we got there. All of the cases, in fact, except the Kenya case, in which the prosecutor used his proprio motor powers, the then prosecutor, are at the invitation of African states, requesting ICC's intervention. I will go to any place that the crimes under the jurisdiction of the court are being committed and nothing is being done to address them, whether it is in Africa or outside of Africa. I'm not ruling out cases outside of Africa, but my mandate dictates that I go to where ICC has jurisdiction, where the crimes are being committed, and it is not being addressed at the national level.
So then, can the ICC deliver impartial justice? To help answer this question and more, we're joined by our guests. In London, Mark Kirsten, a researcher at the London School of Economics and a specialist on the international criminal justice system, the ICC and conflict resolution. From New York, Margaret Kimberley, a senior columnist and editor for the website Black Agenda Report. And from Nairobi, Hassan Omar Hassan from the Kenyan National Human Rights Commission. Welcome to you all. Let's begin in Kenya with Mr. Hassan. When we look at the full list of cases the ICC has pursued in the last 10 years, what's interesting is there isn't a single non-African who's been indicted by the court. What conclusion do you draw from this? Has the ICC turned into the African criminal court, as many people believe it has, or are these types of heinous crimes only committed in Africa by Africans?
First and foremost, just to say that I'm formerly of the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, which I was a commissioner, and we did do a report initially that formed the basis of the ICC intervention in Kenya. I think there could be two analogies to it. The one analogy of the fact that almost all the suspects from Africa could be that One, ICC might just be victimizing the African leaders, but I tend to differ with that kind of analogy. But also the second analogy of it is that the justice system in Africa seems not to be working at a national...
It is all of the 28 indictees who are from Africa. It isn't almost all. Seven cases have been investigated, all of them in Africa.
But that's what I'm saying. The second agenda to that could be the fact that the African national jurisdictions are not delivering justice as it should be, and therefore it has felt necessary that the ICC intervenes. But also it's important to look at these interventions. Uganda requested the intervention of the ICC, so did Rwanda, so did some of these countries where there was intervention. In Kenya, it was a case of the volition of the ICC. In some other countries, it's the case of the Security Council requesting the intervention of the ICC. So I think it's important that it also sends a message that Africa needs to start strengthening its own justice mechanisms in terms of their national jurisdiction.
But isn't it also a fact that some of these countries that you've mentioned, certainly some of the incumbent leaders in these countries, let's take, for example, the case of Kenya, where you have the Prime Minister Raila Odinga seizing on the opportunity to go after his likely political opponent in the elections, Uhuru Kenyatta. It was very convenient for him then, wasn't it, to seek the ICC's jurisdiction?
I think that's part of the political perception that has been created. I do not feel or think that Raila Odinga as a person can interfere and influence the ICC to witch hunt his political opponents to create a safe passage for him for the presidency. I think I'll be quite reluctant to accept that. And I think if the investigations are flawed, that's the better for the suspects, because then with the right legal team, they might be able to clear their names from the prosecution's process. So I don't that there's a perception or there's a politicization of the ICC process in Africa, and I think it is done as part of perpetuating impunity. So you cannot win in the corridors of justice, therefore perpetuate political process.
Ms. Kimberly, is the ICC going after some of the smaller fish because the bigger ones are out of its reach, or is it simply caving into political pressures?
Yes, it is true that it's Africans and a few token Serbs thrown in. The big fish, the United States and the NATO nations, are free to violate international law, to violate human rights with complete impunity. Since the ICC was founded, the United States invaded Iraq. You could call that a genocide. To this day, there are children in the city of Fallujah being born with grotesque deformities as a result of some of the weapons being used there, depleted uranium and so on. Israel attacked Gaza, targeted a civilian population, practiced collective punishment of a civilian population in violation of all the norms of international law and the Geneva Conventions. And the outgoing prosecutor, Mr. Moreno Ocampo, said that Palestine had no standing in the ICC. So it seems as though these rules apply only to weak nations, or also nations that work in concert with the United States and other Western nations who give the United States and the West access to minerals in the Congo, such as the president of Rwanda, Kagame, who violates human rights, practices genocide in effect, is untouched by the ICC because of whose ally he is, that is to say, the powerful nation. So we have a situation where these prosecutions apply only to the weaker, powerless countries, and the nations of the NATO nations, the United States and Western Europe, and Israel can do whatever they want in violation of many different national laws, international laws, and the ICC does nothing.
Mark Kirsten, why does the ICC do nothing? What message does the ICC send when it only pursues these African cases, only indicts current or former African leaders, while allowing some Western leaders to get away with potentially far more significant and serious war crimes and crimes against humanity?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to recognize in the context of this conversation about the bias against African states is actually that if we look at all of the investigations themselves, that actually African states only make up about 50% or so of the investigations that the ICC actually conducts. It's true that all of the indictments so far have come from, have targeted African individuals, rebel leaders, government leaders. etc. And this has created a pretty problematic perception of the International Criminal Court as being racist or neo-colonial or biased or whatever it may be. But I think what's actually
how then do you explain the fact that it hasn't pursued these other cases, these potential allegations of serious crimes against, say, the Palestinian people or Afghan civilians, Iraqi civilians as a result of the invasions that have taken place there?
Well, I think this touches on something that Ms. Kimberly mentioned, which is that we shouldn't necessarily look at this as being biased against Africa, but look at how the International Criminal Court actually relates to particular groups of particular political actors in the international sphere. So, for example, I think that's what's particularly problematic in the context of African perceptions of the International Criminal Court as being biased and neo-colonial is actually that the ICC has had an incredibly cozy relationship with the United Nations Security Council in the past few years. And in doing so, and having this very cozy relationship with the UN Security Council, the ICC, in a sense, reproduces and solidifies in a way the particular power dynamic and distribution of power that African states have always sought to transcend and challenge. And in this way, it reaffirms this kind of realpolitik. And I think, as Ms. Kimberly noted, and I agree with her at least in this regard, that the ICC has, in a sense, catered perhaps too often to states that aren't member states of the International Criminal Court, whereas many African states, I believe it's 33 or so, are members of African states are members of the ICC. And when they joined, it's important to ask why they actually joined. And I believe that they joined the International Criminal Court because they truly believed that this would transcend that type of power politics.
But even in the case, even in the African context, if I can turn this to Mr. Hassan, hasn't there been a significant dose of selectivity going on? Because if you look at the Ivory Coast situation, the ICC was very quick to refer Laurent Gbagbo to the ICC while entertaining, up until now, the idea of allowing Libya to try Saif al-Islam without him having to be referred to the ICC, as if to suggest that the Libyan justice system is in better shape than the Ivorian. Is that the case?
Not necessarily, but what's happened is I think the part where the prosecutor's office has not done very well is how to meander around the politics, or the politics of perception, the politics within the African region. Yes, it is true that they have continued to negotiate on the case of Saif al-Islam, because I think the Libyan authorities have said categorically they will not release Saif al-Islam. What you see with some of the states is the fact that some of the states are far too willing on their own accord to present suspects to the ICC, to invite the ICC, to invite the prosecutor, like when the prosecutor visits Kenya, he's literally a state guest. He meets the president, he meets the prime minister, he's given state security. So I think what has happened is these countries have, on their own volition, appeared far too ready to cooperate with the ICC. And the only way to oust the jurisdiction of the ICC is to ensure that you do conduct credible national investigations. So, and it is not, you cannot avoid accountability merely on account that people from Palestine, people from Iraq, or George Bush, or whoever else has not been prosecuted. We will deal with George Bush, and when the circumstances do dictate, and we could put pressure on that. But in the meantime, those African leaders who've maimed their citizens and have found themselves as suspects of the ICC must face the full throttle of the law.
Ms. Kimberly, do you feel that the circumstances have not dictated such a leader to be put in the dock, to be brought before the international legal system?
Well, obviously, it's true. I mean, it's more than a perception. It's a reality. In Libya, the war that was promoted by the United States and NATO, Black Libyans were targeted for death, African migrants targeted for death, and yet Mr. Moreno Ocampo, who told outright lies about Libyan soldiers having Viagra and using rape as a weapon, did absolutely nothing, took no action. So there's example after example of the United States using drone strikes in Afghanistan and Pakistan, of the situation in Gaza, of continuing rights abuses in Congo, where 6 million people have died since 1996 in a terrible war. But friends of the United States like Museveni in Uganda or Kagame in Rwanda are sitting in their presidential palaces completely unafraid of ever being touched by the ICC. The West has its thumb on the scales of justice, so to speak.
Mark Kirsten, where does it leave then the credibility of the ICC if the United States continues to argue that it cannot ratify the Rome Statute by which the ICC was created because, as it sees its soldiers that are deployed pretty much everywhere in the world might be prosecuted in politically motivated charges? If it holds true for the United States, certainly it holds true for others who have acceded to the Rome Statute.
Well, I think in the case of the United States' relationship to the International Criminal Court, it's not so clear that there is this kind of divide that the United States thinks it's impossible that it would join the ICC. John Bellinger, who was working in the Bush administration at the time that the Bush administration took actions against the International Criminal Court to bar American citizens from being prosecuted or brought to the International Criminal Court, has suggested that it's time to rethink its relationship. Condoleezza Rice said that the American position in being so much against the International Criminal Court was like shooting herself or the United States government itself in the foot.
Well, at this point,
so
its
I think there are
rejection of the
shifting sands
ICC.
Here, but you're right.
At this point, its rejection of the ICC is categoric, though, because recently the U.S. administration did inform the UN Secretary General that it does not intend to ratify the Rome Statute, thereby saying that it has absolutely no obligations whatsoever under the ICC. And it looks like this is going to be the way forward for the next administration.
It's likely that that the United States won't join anytime soon. We'll have to see for Obama's second term. It is possible. There are individuals in his administration who are particularly influential, people like Susan Rice, perhaps Hillary Rodham Clinton, and certainly Samantha Power, individuals who I think that would side with actually the United States ratifying at some point the International Criminal Court's Rome Statute Treaty. That being said, I think it's extremely important to understand that the United States actually did pass legislation which in a sense bars close cooperation or ratification of the ICC. And so that legislation would actually have to be likely would have to be repealed prior to the ICC, to the United States, joining the International Criminal Court. And I do agree that there is, again, going back to the relationship between the UN Security Council and the International Criminal Court, it was very disturbing, I think, to see that, and this was an amendment added by the United States, that in the context of Libya, citizens of states who are not parties to the ICC, like the United States, could not be investigated. And that's precisely the type of practice that needs to stop. And the International Criminal Court over the next...
Ms. Kimberly, allow me to interrupt you if I can. Ms. Kimberly, in New York, can the United States continue to act as a cheerleader for the ICC while shielding itself, its civilians, its officials, its soldiers from the ICC's jurisdiction? It wants to refer officials in Libya, in Syria, in Sudan to the ICC, yet wants nothing to do with it when it comes to its potential crimes.
Well, they've gotten away with it so far, and we have a situation in the world where might makes right. The United States is now the most powerful nation on the earth militarily and economically, and so the United States does whatever it wants to do. There's no one strong enough in this now unipolar world to step in and tell the United States, no, you can't do this any longer. What it will take is a defeat of some kind, military defeat of the United States or an ally to change America's ways regarding the ICC. And I also want to add, Africans, those nations that did sign on to the treaty are going to be less cooperative. It's already begun. The African nations spoke as one and said none of them would turn over President Bashir of Sudan. Their own arrangements have been undone by the ICC. Charles Taylor left power because he was told he would not be prosecuted, and then, of course, he was snatched up and prosecuted. I'm not going to defend Charles Taylor, but when African nations try to act to end bloodshed, to end these conflicts, they are undone by the nations of the West and by the ICC, and I think you will see less cooperation from them in the future.
Mr. Hassan, leaving aside some of the political reservations which may lead to less cooperation by African states in the future, should one also look at the cost of delivering international justice with all of its flaws? After about 9 years, just one conviction, the ICC has cost almost $1 billion to deliver that one conviction of Thomas Lubanga. And this in countries where peoples and societies are living in extreme poverty. Is this the best way to deliver justice, or could the money be better spent in development, perhaps?
I think the entire intention about having the international justice system was noble. I think we wanted to end impunity. We wanted to end this cycle of leaders who butcher their citizens and then just get away with it without any recourse to justice. And I think the International Criminal Court was also supposed to be a deterrence court. But I don't know whether you judge a tribunal or a court by the number of convictions. I think the lesser the convictions at the ICC, possibly it means that there are lesser wars and more working or credible national jurisdictions. So I would look at that kind of
shouldn't the number of cases be indicative, though, of the effectiveness of a court?
I don't think in the interim it is, because I think in any situation that has required some intervention, there has been a minimum sense of intervention. And I think we need to empower more of national jurisdictions. I do not foresee a situation where ICC will be trying all cases in Kenya and in every other part of the world. I think what is most incumbent or what is most critical is for us to empower national jurisdictions. So I think if just the volume of cases cannot be the basis to determine the ICC's effect, I do believe there are other critical issues that need to be answered in terms of the budget vis-a-vis the caseload and the structure, whether it is viable or not. But I think it will be quite simplistic to simply say that because there is one conviction, then the court is not working. I don't think it is the purpose of courts to just send people to jail. But if there are no wars happening, if national jurisdictions are taking effect, then I think it is the better for us to move forward.
Mark Kirsten, how do you respond to the critics of the ICC who say this is a mainly European-funded, European-driven institution that delivers at best victors' justice, as we've seen in some places in Africa? Shouldn't the gap between what is being spent and what is being achieved raise some serious questions about this institution?
Well, I think we need to be realistic about what is actually being spent. I mean, the amount of money that's being spent at the International Criminal Court is still a remarkably small amount in comparison to other costs that governments incur, that international organizations incur, or even things like American baseball teams incur. And I don't mean to, in any sense, suggest that we should compare all these things, but it is still quite a small number for a project that is remarkable and immense, which is to end international impunity. And I agree with Hassan in a sense that we shouldn't be judging the ICC on the basis of its of the fact that it has one conviction against Thomas Lubanga.
Ms. Kimberly, you get the final word on this. If some local courts can do the same job at a fraction of the cost and without some of the politicized agendas that some accuse the ICC of, why bother then with an international tribunal?
Well, if there were equal justice under this law, that would be a good point to make. The local authorities in all of these countries should do this, but the United States doesn't do it either. It's difficult for Americans to judge. President Bush, there were articles of impeachment presented on the invasion of Iraq being given as one of the reasons. And it went nowhere. There were 1 or 2 members of Congress pushing this, and the rest ignored it. So the American people had an opportunity to prove that their domestic authority could punish wrongdoing in the world, and we chose not to do it. So it is difficult for us to say that should happen in the rest of the world. But to answer your question, yes, if there were nations that were able to do this, the International Criminal Court would not exist at all. And that would be a good thing, but it would be a good thing all over the world.
All right, well, we'll leave it there. Thanks to all of our guests from London, Mark Kirsten, from New York, Margaret Kimberley, and from Nairobi, Hassan Omar Hassan. And of course, as always, thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send your feedback, email us your thoughts at insidestory@aljazeera.net. From me, Rida Fakhri, and the entire team, thanks for watching.